Hey everyone, on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got Paul Schnackenburg on, and we're going to be deviating from our usual format a little bit here. Now, initially, Paul and I set out to have a discussion about Microsoft's newly announced Secure Future Initiative. Now, the Secure Future Initiative is Microsoft's reaction to all of the various security incidents they've had over the last couple of years. And this conversation between Paul and I went on for so long that we've decided to turn it into a two-parter. So today is the part one of our two-part episode on the Microsoft Secure Future Initiative. So we're going to be talking about that and lots more on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Well, everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I got Paul Schnackenburg with me. How's it going, Paul?
I'm good, Andy. How are you?
It's good. Doing good. It's a new year, right? And there is no lack of security stuff to talk about. And you're back for one of our very first episodes of this new year, so appreciate having you here, my friend.
Oh, it's great. It's great to be back.
Definitely. And for those that may not know exactly who you are, I can't see how that is possibly the case because you've been a co-host on so many of our episodes, but just in case people aren't aware of who you are, can you give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Paul Schnackenburg. I work part-time for Hornetsecurity. There's the logo right there. And I run my own business here in Australia as an IT consultant. I have been doing that for 25 years. And I write articles and I help people out with, IT and security things.
You're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to talking about security and 365 and the Microsoft ecosystem. And I think what's so helpful for me, selfishly, is that you are in the trenches day in and day out. You're actually using this stuff, right, on a regular basis. So, I mean, you often have a different perspective than some people, right? So that's always useful. So our first topic, one of the first topics we're covering this year, and I know we've kind of beat this like a dead horse, right? We're beating a dead horse with this particular topic, but it's such a big topic that it deserves all the attention that we've given it. And
it does, and also there's also new information coming out all the time. That's another reason,
that's true.
Right? Like
that is true.
One of the reasons we're talking about it today is we've got more information from Microsoft. We've got more on the table that gives us a different perspective on what happened and what's happening going forward.
Exactly. And the issue we're talking about, of course, and to no surprise of those folks that have listened to this show regularly, is the Storm 0558 breach, which happened to Microsoft. Boy, what was this? Back in July 2023, if I remember correctly. June. And just a quick recap, I'm not going to cover the attack in excruciating detail. I will link a couple of the episodes where we've talked about it in the show notes below. But essentially what happened is Chinese nation-state threat actors, they acquired a consumer signing key that they then used to forge authentication tokens into Microsoft Cloud services. Now, I have to pause and make fun of myself for a second because in the previous episode, I said they procured Microsoft signing keys. Now, procure would, imply that they paid for them. Well, they didn't pay for them, so they acquired, pilfered. What'd you say before we hit record, Paul? Purloined?
Purloined.
So yeah, just a clarification there. Right. So anyway, I had to, once Paul brought that to my attention, I had to make fun of myself because I love self-deprecating humor. So I couldn't help myself. But anyway, this is the case that we're talking about today, right? And I mean, Paul, you and I have talked about this breach ad nauseum, right? And I mean, again, folks, I'll link the show notes there. But like you said, Paul, we're getting new information all the time, right? Mm-hmm. All the time. Microsoft's taken a lot of flack over this issue. the U.S. government is looking into this issue. The Cybersecurity Review Board is taking a look at this.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's a lot of eyes on this. And I think, to me, one thing that is interesting, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but it's the word I'm going to go with here, is the fact that it's just this slow trickle of information, right? Other than a couple of blog posts, we haven't seen a whole lot from Microsoft on this. And to start, do you have any particular thoughts on that before we dive deeper here, Paul?
Look, I'm not an incident response expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I've got a sort of an idea of what happens. Look, I think they put out a couple of blog posts early on where they said, look, this happened and these are the early things we're doing to mitigate what's happening. Then they came out with the Secure Future Initiative, which we're going to talk about today. Yep. I think realistically, you always want more information and more complete information. I think there's two parts to that. One is when you have an ongoing investigation, you don't want to tell people the wrong thing, right? You don't want to go, oh, we have evidence that this is what's happening, so let's just say that's what it was. And then a week later you go, oh, crap, there was actually this over here, and we hadn't got to that yet, and we missed that, right? Now we're going to look like amateurs when we revealed that as well, right? So you want to have a pretty good idea what's going on, which is why it's funny in a lot of these sort of data security regulations and laws that are springing up in different countries around the world, where they have 48-hour notification time. Well, sometimes within 48 hours, you have no idea whether any data was actually stolen or not, whether it's actually something you need to report or not, because you haven't had the time to get to the incident response. So that's one. Number two, though, is I think realistically, this is a big thing for Microsoft. And I think they had to have the lawyers involved. They had to have the marketing department involved. They had to have the word marketing salad automation programs go over the text.
I have comments on that. I have comments on that we'll get to. We'll get to it.
Me too. So that's probably part of the picture why it took a bit longer than one would have wanted. I think that's part of it.
Right. And so you mentioned the thing that we're going to spend probably a good chunk of this episode on. And just a heads up for our listeners, we may deviate from our normal kind of strategy, session length, whatever you want to call it, in that this has the possibility of becoming a two-part episode. There's a lot to unpack here. And the main thing I wanted to cover here is okay, we had this Storm 0558 incident, and now Microsoft has announced what they're calling the Secure Future Initiative as a response to this and the plethora of other security incidents that they've had in the past couple of years. Paul, you and I, we did an episode where not only did we talk about Storm 0558, we talked about, I want to say 4 or 5 other pretty significant security issues with Microsoft. And I'll link that in the show notes as well, folks, so you have that. But what I want to focus on right now is the Secure Future Initiative. And this is something that Microsoft has recently announced. I think they announced this at their Ignite event in November, if I remember correctly.
It could have been a little bit before, I think.
Might have been,
a couple of weeks before, but fairly recently, basically.
Yeah, but I've got kind of the one-sentence description of the Secure Future Initiative, or as they call it, SFI, right? And it reads, and I quote, "The Microsoft Secure Future Initiative is a multi-year commitment to advance the way we design, build, test, and operate our technology to ensure we deliver solutions that meet the highest possible standard of security in the new era of AI."
Yep.
Okay. Sounds good, right, on the surface, but what does it actually mean, right? And Paul, I know you have some starting thoughts on this. I'll kick the ball over to you to get us going on this.
I do. So there is 3 pillars in the SFI. One of them is, and it's the first one out of the gate, is talking about AI. and
Surprise.
how they're going to use AI to identify threats. And look, there's no doubt. Well, first of all, AI and its sort of part of the family machine learning has been part of security for a long time, right? Like
Right.
if you're running Windows Defender on your endpoint, you are already using cloud and AI, and you've been doing it for quite a few years, right? So this and any other endpoint detection and response tool will be doing the same, right? Because it's got to look at behavior. You can't look at signatures anymore for malware, that sort of thing, right? So that's been happening for a long time. I think that Microsoft is trying to ride the AI wave, and realistically, they have landed on something that hasn't happened to Microsoft for well over a decade. You could argue maybe Surface Pro 3 was sort of a new thing that actually caught on, but for the first time in
Right.
many, many years, Microsoft is a leader, right? Like their AI tools are better. Well, the open AI tools that they are using in their copilots, etc., are better than the competition, and
Right.
that's amazing. And everybody wants them, and it's and they're going to charge for them, and it's they're riding that wave. So I think they're a bit drunk on AI. And I don't doubt that AI is going to be part of how we deal with security issues going forward, but it's a bit early to make it a pillar and make it load bearing in your foundational structure at this point. I think that's it's a bit too early to say, well, we're just going to have AI and it's going to fix everything magically, because that's what it sounds
Right.
like when you're reading the Secure Futures Initiative. And I want to
Right.
contrast it here for a minute. For those of you who are a bit younger in the audience, welcome to IT. Some of us are old and bald, or balding.
Or
And we
balding.
were
Yes.
around. We
Same
were
here.
around back in the day. Well, I should turn around. You can see there's a big bald patch on the middle there. That's how long I've been in IT. In 2002, Microsoft had an issue. There had been a number of high-profile attacks that reached mainstream media that really showed the lack of security in Microsoft's product. Code Red, Nimda, SQL Slammer, a few other things like that. These were worms that literally went around the planet in a few seconds and hit all these
Oh yeah.
machines and did all sorts of things, right? And Bill Gates sat down and wrote the Trustworthy Computing Memo that went out to everybody at Microsoft at the time. He was the CEO, and he said, look, we've got to fix this. And the Trustworthy Computing is a lot shorter than the SFI. It very clearly lays out that, and I'm paraphrasing here, we are screwing up what we're doing. We need to change, and here's what we're going to do so that our customers will trust the solutions we're putting into their hands, right? It was a very clear initiative. They stopped development on everything they were on at the time. They put out XP Service Pack 2. They built a secure development life cycle, the SDL, that was at the time very much industry leading. And XP Service Pack 2 turned on the firewall in Windows for the first time by
Right.
default, and
Yeah.
all sorts of things, right? Like there was a lot of changes, and there was a lot of good security came out of that after that time. And so many people, including me, are comparing the SFI to the Trustworthy Computing Initiative. To me, the Trustworthy Computing Initiative was the CEO of the company, the boss of the boss, the highest guy saying, hey, we need to change the culture of our company because this is an existential threat for this organization. We got to fix this, and we've got to do right by our customers, and we've got to make computing trustworthy. The SFI is the bad guys are getting faster, and we need to do something, and we're going to be very trustworthy in the future because we're going to do AI, and we're going to do more security bits, and we're going to patch 50% faster. I mean, like it's not the same thing, and it doesn't smell of a realization that
Right.
they have a problem culturally. And I think culturally, I think that's the problem. That's what we wanted to see. Now, it's possible that behind the scenes, they've had some of that realization. It is possible that some of the changes behind the scenes are actually speaking to that. But we don't know, because it's certainly not in the SFI, and it's not in the internal email that was also publicly made public from Charlie Bell, where he talks to all the people at Microsoft about we all have to put security first, etc. None of that is fundamentally saying we need to change the culture of our organization. It's not saying that. And I think I get the smell of it, but it's very hard to say from the outside, of course, but I get the smell of it saying they're not really realizing that they have a problem. And just like an alcoholic that think it's okay to drink a few times a week and it's going to be okay, they haven't quite realized they actually have a problem.
Oh, a few security incidents. That's not a big problem. It just
We'll be right.
And I like the way you put it in that I really, what I was looking for was a cultural shift, some big acknowledgement. And I think it should have come from Satya. And it didn't.
No. And that's really confusing. That was my first thing when I read this. Where's Satya? Where's the head honcho? Because if it's not the head honcho, then it's not fundamental to the organization.
Right.
But when it's the boss saying it, I'm the boss of everybody at Microsoft, and I'm saying this is really important. He's nowhere to be seen, right? And that's weird. I just find that weird. Like, literally, strange. The guy could have written the whole thing, and then they could have put Satya as the author at the bottom. And that would have made all the difference, I think, because at least then we would have seen the head honcho going, we need to take this seriously.
Right. And the way I look at it is, and I think I've mentioned this in some of our conversations about this, is Microsoft's entire cloud model is built on trust. Mm-hmm. They've been saying for years, hey, let us be your data center. Let us be your productivity platform. Let us be your IT infrastructure, basically, right? They've been saying that for years. And if I put my system admin hat on or my CISO hat on or CIO or whatever my place in the organization is, if I don't feel comfortable that my data is going to be safe in your cloud, I'm probably not going to buy from you, right? And I know when we talk about 365 specifically, it's arguable that there's nothing else on the market that can touch it in terms of features and capabilities. But if I run the risk of having a security incident, losing my data, having it breached, I'm probably going to settle for a not as feature-rich product set, right?
Yes, exactly, right? And this is a big thing. And there will be lots of organizations now that are saying where they have been resisting going to the cloud, there will be lots of organizations with lots of old IT guys with beards who go, like, see, I told you, this is why we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. It's much safer to do it here. Now, literally, unless you're the NSA and you're building the most secure systems on the planet, your on-premises systems are very, very, very unlikely to be more secure than the cloud.
Right.
But it's perception that counts. It's perception that builds trust. Like, we can't all go to Microsoft's data centers and see all their security. We can't all do code reviews of every line of code in Azure or Microsoft 365 and understand it. So it's all about the perception that we get that gives us the security or not. I'm just going to bring Hornetsecurity back.
Oh, gotcha. I see the background changed on you there.
Very bright. No, I don't want that.
No worries. It takes me back to a direct report I had back in my early career who said, perception is everything. Perception is everything. And he was, of course, talking about it from a customer service perspective, right? But to your point, I've written in articles about this before. Eric Siren and I have actually talked about this on this show, and I'll link that episode in the show notes as well, about exactly what you just mentioned. Good luck trying to build a data center as secure as Azure, AWS, etc. on your own. I mean, given enough time, resources, sure, maybe you'll succeed, but we're talking money, lots and lots of money and time to do that, and expertise.
Also, realistically, in a commercial sense, it won't be worth it, right? Like, unless you're a defense contractor and you're building, nuclear missiles for the US military or something, that's different. But for the rest of us normal businesses, right? Like even if you're dealing with sensitive stuff, you
Yep.
could do that, but the amount of ongoing cost, etc., will make you less competitive in the market, and that doesn't make any sense. But that
Yep.
doesn't change the perception of this, right? And having the marketing people write word salad is not really the way to deal with it. To me, it doesn't feel like it, right? So one of the other things they talk a lot about is strengthening identity protection. Right? Now they're talking about identity protection in a general sense, but one of the things that I really felt when I read that is that Microsoft has a fantastic identity protection service as part of Entra ID. It looks at risky sign-ins. Every business sign-in is evaluated for riskiness. Every user is evaluated for how risky that user is, and then you can build policies around it. But the full power of that is only unlocked when you got Entra ID, or used to be
Right.
called Azure ID, P2. So if they really wanted to strengthen identity protection for everybody, give those features to everybody. Even if you have basic Entra ID, you should
Yep.
have those features, right? Maybe lock away some of the other identity governance that really only makes sense to big businesses. Okay, that makes sense. But all the identity protection should be available to everybody who's using Entra ID. That would mean taking identity protection seriously, because more businesses would be able to access that.
Absolutely. And to me, this comes back to the cultural conversation because, again, talking about this same attack, the only way that the U.S. State Department was able to detect it was because they were paying for the advanced logging necessary to catch this style of attack, which begs the question, should logging like this be behind a paywall? Should security features like this be behind a paywall? And I get that there's a cost associated with maintaining and running the services, and I know that they're a for-profit company and they have a mandate to make money. I get that, but when you're as large as they are and you have as many users and you hold as much data as they do, your responsibility is a little bit different, in my opinion.
I do want to point out also that the State Department didn't just discover it because they had the advanced logging. They also had built custom detections on top of that logging.
Yep.
So that's how they spotted this in the first place. And we've mentioned that before, but that's part of why I feel that Microsoft sort of dropped the ball 2 or 3 times in this whole situation. One of the ways they dropped the ball is they didn't discover this themselves. A customer of theirs did it. And that customer only did it because, as you said, they paid for the advanced logging and they had custom detections on top of it to actually catch it, right? So a bit embarrassing, really, I think.
A little bit. So, well, so far, Paul, we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about the Secure Future Initiative, SFI, comparing it with, past stances from Microsoft. There's 3 main pillars that the Secure Future Initiative consists of. Should we go through each pillar, you think, one at a time here? Because I know we've got a lot of thoughts on each of these individual areas.
Well, I think we've sort of covered most of them already, actually. We have talked about the AI, and this is a little bit more than just the AI we talked about. They also want to do AI for code analysis, code QL.
That's the point I wanted to bring up, was the code analysis piece, as well as the log analysis.
And I think there's definitely space here to improve things for sure. Like code QL, again, I'm not a developer, but I know what code QL is. And it's a very cool way of analyzing your code for primarily SQL injection attacks, right? So, and it sort of builds a database that you can then query afterwards. So you have a database that you can query about the database that people query. But it's cool technology, right? And again, these are incremental things. They will make things better, certainly using AI for log analytics, but they're already doing that, right? They're talking about 65 trillion signals a day. They sure as heck don't have billions of people sitting and looking at those signals manually, right? So I think that I think they're already doing that. They're going to be better at it. Great, that's fantastic. But it's not a thing to build your new security initiative on.
Right, and that's a good point. And I've got two thoughts around this that kind of tie into this, right, around the whole AI bit. And the first is, like you said, log analysis. They're already doing it with all of those signals, and I think it's great that they're using AI for log analysis, because I don't know about you, Paul. I hate doing log analysis. It is terrible. I absolutely hate it.
Yep.
And I've said that on the show before, So the more we can have AI do effective log analysis, the better. Great. Awesome. And I think AI plays a huge role in defensive tools for sure. Umut Alamdar and we actually did an episode specifically about AI and defensive toolkits. I'll link that in the show notes as well too. The one area that is kind of interesting to me about secured code analysis, and this is kind of a fringe case, but I've been doing a lot of reading lately. We've been having a lot of conversations about this concept of a LLM poisoning attack. And if you're not aware of what this type of attack is, basically threat actors would gain access to an LLM and poison the responses that it would spit out. Now, I see the benefits of AI, don't get me wrong, but I have to believe, and I hope, as part of the SFI, Microsoft is at least looking at that. How do you secure the AI that you're using for code analysis to make sure that attackers don't poison it somehow, right? And that's a whole new wave of potential attacks that I think we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of years. But that's a concern, right?
Absolutely, I agree. And one of the things that I have been listening to a few of the Blue Hat Microsoft's security conference that they had a few weeks ago, and they're public on the on YouTube. You can go look for them. One of them talks about the risks associated with large language models and poisoning and all of that sort of stuff. Right? Code is a little bit better though, so I do want to point that out. That because everything is AI now and everybody's talking about AI and it's the big hype train, right? It's a very different thing to analyze English language to figure out what the next word should be, right? When you're trying to write an article like ChatGPT is doing, to an editor looking at code, because it's a much narrower space. Like the syntax is the syntax. Like there is no, like you could do things in very different ways in English and express the same thing, but you can't procured and acquired, purloined and stolen. Whereas in code, you cannot use 4 different things to achieve the same thing. Like it's the syntax is the syntax.
Syntax is syntax, yep.
So I think AI has a little bit of a stronger case there. And again, I can see this being good, but it doesn't change the fundamental culture. And that is what I think is important. And I think that's not going to be fixed by having an AI finding coding issues and security issues in code.
Feels like a Band-Aid, right?
Yep.
Feels like a Band-Aid. And when they announced this at Ignite, Security Copilot at Ignite, they prefaced the announcement with, there's a shortage of, I forget what it is, 3 million security professionals. I think the number is 3 million.
3.5, I've heard. I've heard 2.5. Lots of people.
And so, I mean, the intent is fine. I think that's great. They're trying to address that. But an AI model is not a replacement for 3.5 million security professionals.
No, it's not. It's not. And it's early days, right? Like they're riding the hype train like nobody's business. Like in a year or two, we will know much more what Security Pilot actually gives us, right? Does it really take your 6 month in the job tier 1 security analyst and make them as productive as a tier 2 with 5 years experience or 3 years experience, whatever, right? Does it really do that?
Right.
Is it cost effective? I mean, at the moment, the Security Copilot preview, private preview cost money, and lots of money apparently. We don't know what the sum is, but this is the first time I think that Microsoft has ever charged for a private preview of a technology, which leads me to believe that when it actually comes out and you can actually go and buy it, it's going to have a price tag on it.
I'm sure it will.
Price tag on it, right? So will that fix the problem? Who knows? Who knows at this point?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for watching today's episode, folks. Just a reminder, this is the end of the first of a 2-part episode on Microsoft's Secure Future Initiative. We'll be back next week with part 2. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later.